the late 70s, I was a photographer for the New York Post. I was photographing in an area known as Alphabet City, Avenue A, B, C, and D. I often saw the same kids. And one boy, whose name I had thought of as Edwin, he said to me, "Why don't you take pictures of graffiti?" And I had actually never noticed graffiti, or hadn't really entered my consciousness, mostly because I couldn't read it. I didn't know what it meant. And he had this notebook with him and showed me that he was designing these pieces, his name, his nickname, which happened to be He3, and that he put them on walls. This fascinated me, the idea that graffiti was something that was designed before it was put up, that it wasn't vandalism. When I began to question him, he said, "Well, I know a king and I can introduce you." And he introduced me to Gandhi, who was in fact the king of the line. And I just became obsessed with documenting graffiti. Kids today call Gandhi a style master, and he definitely was one of the great kings of graffiti. After I had been documenting Gandhi for a while, he did allow me to go into the yards with him, and then I understood how you could climb up to hit the top of the car. If you look at the train that he was painting that night, it says 1980 on the car, and he also put a little MC for me, Martha Cooper. I was doing all my documentation of graffiti as purely a personal project. I saw it as this youth art form that was sort of equally interesting to fine art, that it had its own sort of sets of aesthetics and rules and critics. I just became fascinated because I felt here we're in the art center of the world and we're ignoring this whole range of art. When I began documenting graffiti, and in fact the whole time I was documenting graffiti, I felt as if I was doing it in the spirit of historic preservation. The Post was not at all interested in publishing any positive stories about graffiti. One assignment that they sent me on was to go to Washington Heights to a subway station where supposedly there had been a riot. When I got up there, I found a bunch of little boys sitting, hanging their heads in the police station, which they would not let me take a photograph, but I did sneak one. One of the cops said, "Tell the lady what you were doing." And they told me that they had not been rioting, they had been dancing and spinning on their heads. I took a picture of the cops with what they had confiscated from the kids. And what they had confiscated, in addition to a gun and a knife, included a lot of markers and spray cans. So I immediately thought, "Oh, this is interesting. We've got kids who are dancing, who are also kids that are writing." And that immediately sparked my interest that there was a connection. The Village Voice published this story, front page, calling it physical graffiti. This is the first time that breakdancing ever appears in print. And as a result, New York being a media town, a lot of TV stations really glommed onto this as an idea. Suddenly, what had been an underground culture, something that I had been searching for with difficulty, turned into something that the media was following. I would say it took off from there. My friend Henry had heard about this music, which I had not heard about, called rapping. That's actually the very first time I ever saw rapping and DJing. I do remember thinking that the setup was just so incredibly ugly. That handmade wooden box with all those wires. And now when I look at it, I think, well, why wasn't I interested in the fact that he had handmade his equipment? That's Grand Wizard Theodore and Kevy Kev. Here we have Kool Moe Dee, and this is one of the few pictures I have of Run DMC. I think there was an air of excitement around the idea that there was something new that wasn't rock and roll, something that was happening in the city, but only among people who were already in that downtown scene. As soon as it became popular, I lost interest in documenting it. I used photography as a kind of a tool to go out and look at things. And I felt like, well, why do I need to take pictures? Like, it's well documented now. I like to take pictures of things that aren't well documented. In the 90s, I was contacted by a German publisher, and he wanted to do a hip-hop book with my old photos, and he went through the photos, and he was all excited. We published this book, Hip Hop Files, and then I went on a little tour with the book in Europe. It's amazing to me that I went from seeing hip-hop as non-existent to being a predominant world culture. It makes me feel really lucky. Yeah, it's very surprising and rewarding at the same time.